That morning started in silence, the kind of silence that only comes after a storm has passed. I was sitting in front of a wall of monitors, watching the final traces of a billion-dollar threat disappear. No one clapped. No one even knew how close we had come to disaster. But to me, the quiet hum of the servers was applause enough. I believed the hardest part of my day was already behind me. I was wrong. By 8:04 a.m., everything I thought was secure: my role, my value, my promise of promotion was handed to someone else. So if you're watching this right now, maybe in your car, maybe on your lunch break, just tell me one thing. Where are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels, and if something in you recognizes something in this. Stay with me. My name is Claire Donovan, and on that morning I was exactly where I was meant to be, inside the operations floor of a company that prized polished surface and smooth deals, while I believed true strength lived in precision and discipline. It was early, the sun barely touching the glass walls above me. Most of the building was only beginning to stir with coffee and small talk, but I had already been awake for 72 hours. 72 hours of quiet focus, refusing to blink when the screens flashed warnings. Just before 8, the last trace of the intrusion vanished, and across the wall of monitors the hurried storms dissolved into a steady, ordered flow of green. Every victory I valued came dressed in silence. No one outside the room would know how close the country had edged toward chaos. No one would pat me on the back or announce my name, and that was fine. Applause fades quickly. The steady hum of the servers lasted longer. It was enough. A young analyst behind me let out a shaky breath as though surfacing from deep water. I stayed still, eyes fixed on the screen, letting the calm sink into me the way sunlight sinks into stone. Silence was proof. Silence meant the system had held. I recorded the closing details into the company's files not for recognition, but because accuracy was owed. When the logs were complete, I felt that rare steadiness that only comes when something intricate works the way you designed it to. I believed the hardest part of my day was finished, that all that remained was routine report to the chief executive officer, accept the promotion already promised, and formally begin leading the division. The elevator ride upward felt strangely empty after the noise of machines. My fingers still carried the faint tension of hours without rest, but my mind had already drifted toward what awaited me on the executive floor. Downstairs, I had fought shadows no one would see. Upstairs, careers were made by pretending to fight nothing at all. The hall outside the top suite was muffled with thick carpet, paneled in heavy wood, glowing warm. I stepped into Richard Callahan's office expecting confirmation, and for a moment that was exactly what I heard. He spoke of recognition, of decisive action, of how my work had prevented disaster. His expression suggested a man ready to make a private assurance public. I listened carefully, certain that the title and the responsibility would finally be matched. Then the door opened. Madeline Callahan entered, carrying a file but moving with the ease of someone already rehearsed for the room. Sharp tailoring, calm expression, eyes that calculated as quickly as they seemed to admire. She spoke politely, thanking me for work that sounded, in her tone, more like a formality than genuine respect. She left as quietly as she had come, and Richard closed his remarks as though nothing had changed. I returned to the hall carrying the calm of someone who trusted a promise. 2:00 in the boardroom, he had said, and I had no reason to doubt his word. I thought of Madeline's presence as background noise. What was promised quietly, I believed, would be spoken firmly in daylight. What I did not see yet was that my morning silence had only been borrowed, not earned. The true storm was not an attack from outside. It was the system itself, behaving exactly as it always had, protecting appearances, undermining substance. By the time the clock reached 8:04, the day I thought I had secured would already belong to someone else. The boardroom was already full when I stepped inside that afternoon. The light was bright, the table polished to a cold shine, and the directors carried the calm air of people who believed in ceremony more than substance. I took my seat without hesitation, not nervous, only steady, like someone prepared for a responsibility already earned. I had spent the morning certain that what was promised privately would soon be affirmed here. I believed promises carried weight. Richard Callahan entered with his usual stride, practiced and steady. He looked every bit the leader whose authority came not from surviving storms, but from living in rooms where storms never reach. He began with a preamble about resilience, market vision, long-term trust words constructed to reassure the board more than to honor truth. As his gaze crossed the room, he gave me a subtle nod, the quiet signal that my name was about to be called. He paused to let anticipation grow. He spoke of the need for a leader who combined technical expertise with presence, someone who could both protect the system and inspire confidence in clients. Each line sounded like an introduction to my appointment. Then the final words came, and the name was not mine. He announced his daughter, Madeline Callahan. She stood gracefully, her expression not triumphant but inevitable, as though the choice had always belonged to her. She thanked her father and the board in a steady voice, promising energy, connection, and renewed trust. The room answered with measured applause, yet beneath it lingered hesitation, eyes flickering toward me and away again. I stayed perfectly still, my hands rested in my lap, my face calm, the chair supporting me like something cold and unyielding. Silence, I knew, carried more weight than any protest. To speak would legitimize the charade. To remain still was to place responsibility where it belonged on a system that valued image before substance. When the applause softened, Madeline extended her remarks, turning them into something sharper. She praised my work, then reframed it as limitation. My focus, she said, was unmatched, but leadership required more than code and precision. In her voice, my strength became an excuse, and my reserve became a flaw. She delivered the words with perfect control, trained not in crisis but in theater. I did not look at her or at her father. My expression gave them nothing. When the meeting closed, I stood and left quietly, letting the heavy carpet swallow the sound of my steps. Behind me, directors shuffled their papers, unwilling to meet my eyes. The hallway was the same as it had been that morning, polished wood. Warm lighting, but it felt altered, as though something in its air had already collapsed. Not collapsed in me, for what I built remained intact, collapsed in them, in the structure that had chosen to betray itself, walking away. I understood there was no need for raised voices. The system had committed itself to appearances, and in doing so had written the first line of its own undoing. By the time I returned to my floor, the news had already preceded me. Heads lifted, glances followed. Some looked away quickly, others let their pity linger. I returned each look with nothing. Sympathy was weightless. The only thing that mattered now was the quiet certainty that every system pays for its design, and theirs had just revealed its flaw. When I arrived back at my office, a message pulled me into a gathering space that rarely included technical staff. Rows of chairs faced a stage where directors and senior leaders sat waiting. It was clear from the start this was not an update, not a meeting, but a performance. And like any performance, the ending had already been rehearsed. Madeline stood at the front with a measured confidence that matched her perfectly chosen suit. She opened with thanks, her voice smooth and steady, and then turned her attention toward me as though the moment demanded a gesture of recognition. She told the room my work had been invaluable, that the system I built had shielded the company from disasters no one ever saw, that my precision was undeniable. Every line began as flattery but bent inward, reshaped into something else. Her steady, practiced smile made my silence sound like weakness. She claimed I was indispensable in code but inadequate with people. She said I was evidence of brilliance, but also proof that brilliance without charm could not lead. Each compliment carried an edge, cutting not only at my credibility, but also at the foundation of the board's choice. The directors nodded slightly, uneasy, but reluctant to interrupt the smooth performance. I stayed still in my chair. My expression revealed nothing, though I recorded every note in my mind prior around me. Some colleagues shifted uncomfortably, their eyes sliding downward or away, their silence serving as their only protest. Madeline was not careless, nor naive. Her skill was in shaping perception, turning a knife and making it look like ribbon. When her speech ended, clapping rose thin, uncertain, just enough to fill the silence. She accepted it with ease, as though this applause had always belonged to her. I let it pass, then rose once the sound began to fade, sliding my chair back without noise. I offered no rebuttal, no words at all. Walking out with measured steps, I left the echo behind to settle into the room like dust. In that moment, my silence was not surrender, it was evidence. By refusing to answer, I let their choice speak for itself. And what it said was plain: the company had chosen charm over defense, and the cost of that choice was already written. The corridor outside was still, but from the way the air felt, I could sense the shift underneath. They believed a narrative had been solidified. I knew better. Failures planted by arrogance always grow, quietly at first, until silence is no longer protection but proof. When I returned to my floor after the performance, the air felt noticeably heavier. Colleagues kept their eyes lowered, unsure whether to speak or to bury themselves in their screens. I did not pause. I walked straight to my office and closed the door. If they expected anger or panic, what they saw instead was order. That has always been my way when chaos rises. I bring it back to structure. I sat at my desk and began the work they assumed no longer mattered. I opened a clean document and started writing the full transition for the Aegis system. Every protocol, every active project, each chain of responsibility was laid out with calm precision. There was not a trace of bitterness in it. I left nothing undone, but I did not give away what could not be written, the instinct born from years of creating a system not only to respond but to anticipate. The blueprint I left was complete, but the architect remained with me. Time slipped by as I worked line by line. The act itself was almost meditative, the rhythm of creating order where none was expected. A passerby might have thought I was completing a routine report. That was the way I wanted it. Nearly an hour later, I noticed a shadow in the doorway. Madeline stood there, a device in her hand, her posture composed but edged with tension. She asked for full control of Aegis, expecting me to instruct her directly, maybe even to argue. She wanted a scene instead. I attached the finished file to a message and pressed send, without looking up. I told her in an even voice, "Everything you need is waiting in your inbox." Her jaw tightened beneath the smile she forced to hold in place. She had wanted resistance, a visible confrontation to secure a second victory. What she met instead was indifference. She muttered agreement, pretending it was control, and stepped away. When she was gone, I packed slowly. I placed the few personal things I kept into a small leather bag, a ceramic mug, a book worn soft from handling, a framed photograph of a coastline I once walked. Each item went in quietly and deliberately until my desk was bare, a surface scrubbed of any trace of me. I left without rush. My exit was not retreat, but withdrawal on my own terms. As I walked toward the elevators, I felt eyes following me. Some stared openly, searching my face for weakness. Others looked away quickly, unwilling to be caught in the middle. I met none of them. The elevator doors closed, and silence filled the box around me. This was not the silence of victory. Not yet. It was a different kind, the silence that lingers between a choice and its consequence. The quiet that waits while the weight of a system's design begins to lean against itself. The following week began with announcements disguised as progress. A new directive came from the executive floor, wrapped in language about innovation and transformation. What it demanded was clear: the detailed diagnostic reports that our team had relied on for years were to be discarded. They were replaced with glossy dashboards filled with smooth curves, cheerful symbols, and colors designed less to reveal danger than to soothe a room full of investors. I watched familiar routines unravel. Where analysts once submitted raw findings, they now worked twice as long shaping simplified graphics that concealed more than they revealed. Conversations no longer revolved around vulnerabilities. Instead, engineers debated which shade of blue made the charts appear less severe. Instruments that once cut through uncertainty were blunted into decoration. Several colleagues stopped by my office in the research wing, their voices lowered. They admitted the reports were nearly useless, then quietly showed me charts that looked attractive but carried no detail, dashboards suitable for a slideshow but blind to real threats. One analyst, exhausted, said the Pentagon demanded clarity, never cosmetics. He laughed without humor when he added that Madeline described the changes as client-friendly. I said almost nothing, because nothing else was required. The direction was obvious. A system built on appearance holds shape only until reality presses against it. Madeline filled her schedule with luncheons and polished messages sent to other divisions. Not once did she seek the engineers who designed the architecture she claimed to command. To her, the role was not about command at all. It was about visibility. From my desk in the corner, I observed with certainty. She was convincing the board with colors and slogans, but she was not convincing the system itself. Defense does not negotiate with appearance, it only responds to accuracy. And each ornamental chart widened the gap between what the company displayed and what it was actually prepared to endure. News of these changes spread quietly, carried on the weary voices of those who still cared about truth. On the surface, the story was one of fresh leadership and renewed energy. There were photographs of Madeline smiling beside banners about resilience, her presence smooth and flawless. To me, every one of those images felt like another coat of paint over a wall already starting to crack. I did not need to argue. I needed only to let the weight of her choices accumulate. No system can withstand the strain when presentation replaces preparation. And while the board clapped for her colorful dashboards, the pause between each meeting grew heavier. It was the kind of pause I recognized, the quiet moment before pressure finally breaks what is only pretending to hold. The announcement came on a Thursday afternoon, and it was broadcast across the company with unusual excitement. It praised a bold initiative from Madeline Callahan herself, a live crisis drill with the Pentagon. The message spoke of partnership, transparency, and leadership. To the board, it sounded like vision. To me, it sounded like an invitation for disaster. A live exercise is not theater. It is not a demonstration where carefully chosen words can distract or where colorful charts can disguise weak preparation. A drill in the presence of the Department of Defense is an unforgiving test where every hesitation is counted and every wrong step magnified. A client like the Pentagon has no interest in performance. They measure only truth and readiness. As the announcement spread, tension moved quietly through the office. Engineers whispered in corridors, warning that one wrong decision during the test could unravel years of trust. Some of them glanced toward me as they spoke, not asking aloud, but sending the question with their eyes: would the system endure under her command? Madeline, however, absorbed the board's praise with ease. Company-wide emails celebrated her initiative. Executives praised her for her courage, mistaking recklessness for confidence. She framed the drill as proof that her leadership was building stronger ties with the Pentagon, proof that her charm and presence mattered more than the sterile precision she had dismissed. I could almost admire the audacity almost. From my office window, I watched the build-up in calm certainty. The schedule was fixed for the following Wednesday. There would be no chance to hide in that room, no glossy dashboards to shield her from real-time decisions. The system I had built would function exactly as designed, but it required a commander fluent in its logic. She was not. For a moment, I thought of sending her a note and offer to brief her, to help her grasp the basics she ignored. But I already knew her answer. Her pride would never permit that kind of concession. To seek my guidance would dismantle the image she had carefully built. So I stayed quiet and let the days move closer to their own conclusion. The drill had ceased to be a test of the system and had become a test of her. She was too eager to stand in front of generals, too certain that presence alone would disguise the void beneath. What she did not understand was simple machines do not flatter, and generals do not applaud mistakes. The exercise she imagined as her showcase would offer only one outcome: the truth. And she herself had chosen the very moment it would be revealed. Wednesday arrived with a stillness that felt nothing like an ordinary morning. The boardroom had been arranged into something closer to a theater, not in decoration, but in anticipation. Rows of directors sat stiff in their chairs, and executives lined the walls with polite confidence. At the head of the table, Richard Callahan carried the easy confidence of a man convinced appearances could still protect him. Beside him, Madeline sat in perfect posture, her dark suit tailored to project authority. At precisely 10 o'clock, General Hayes entered with 2 aides. They spoke no greetings, bringing with them only the weight of consequence. The drill began immediately. The main screen erupted with cascading red vectors, alarms pulsing low and urgent. It was a simulation designed to mimic the chaos of a real incursion, created to overwhelm and demand immediate judgment. Analysts leaned forward, voices rising as they turned to their new leader for orders. Madeline froze. Her eyes swept across the influx of signals yet found no clarity. One analyst called out an option. Another warned of a data bleed masked within the noise. Both waited for direction. She gave none, Instead, she turned toward General Hayes and delivered polished words about strategic collaboration and long-term trust. Her voice carried composure, but it floated above the crisis instead of engaging it. Seconds dragged. Each one that passed was its own verdict. The red lines spread, the alarms pressed harder, and hesitation itself became the command. From my corner, I knew exactly which choices the system demanded, but the question was not asked of me. It was asked of her, and she had no language to answer. The analysts tried again, voices sharper now. The Zurich note is compromised, one urged. Another warned of an attack hidden inside the patterns. Their urgency escalated until Madeline raised a hand, as though she were quieting a minor disruption. She replied with vague assurance, "We believe in a measured approach." The room sank into a pause heavier than the alarms themselves. It was not the pause of strategy, but of realization. I remained silent. I did not need to add a word. The system itself was already delivering judgment, line by line, across the screen. And the truth was clear, this was not her stage. It was her trial. The alarm stopped without warning. Not because the threat had been contained, but because General Hayes gave a single nod, his aide tapped a key, and the simulation froze. Red lines hung in mid-strike, suspended above the glowing map like weapons locked in the air. For a moment, relief crossed Madeline's face as if the pause meant victory. She began to speak, shaping her words into the triumphant conclusion she had prepared. Hayes's voice cut through before she could finish. He did not raise it, did not thunder. He simply said, "Stop," a single word, flat and final. The boardroom went still. Madeline blinked, her smile faltering, as though it no longer knew where it belonged. She asked if the drill had confirmed the system's reliability. Hayes did not even turn toward her. He spoke to her father instead. "Your system functioned flawlessly," he said with measured calm, "but your operator has failed completely." The words struck harder than any shout. Richard Callahan's confidence collapsed. Directors shifted in their seats, their hands suddenly still, their eyes darting between father and daughter. Hayes continued without pause. The drill was never a stage for polish. It was an audit of command, of clarity. What he had witnessed was indecision wrapped in presentation, and a facade of leadership that broke apart the moment urgency demanded truth. With the Pentagon, there is no space for performance. Readiness is not performance, it is command delivered without hesitation. Madeline stayed silent, her lips parted, but nothing followed. This was not my silence controlled, deliberate. It was exposure laid bare. Then Hayes spoke the final line. "Until proper oversight is restored, all collaboration is suspended. No anger, no theater, only certainty." He gathered his notes, rose, and left the room with his aides. The door shut softly behind them, yet it sounded heavier than any gavel. In that instant, the applause that had carried Madeline into power vanished. What remained was an absence her charm could not fill, the quiet collapse of reputation. At 10:17 that morning, the $700 million contract slipped from their grasp. It was not torn away, it was withdrawn, with the quiet force by which truth always acts. And everyone in that room knew whose silence was now being remembered. The hours after the drill felt strangely weightless, as if the building itself had forgotten how to carry sound. No one hurried through the corridors. Conversations dropped to whispers, their proud contract with the Pentagon, the jewel of the firm's credibility, had evaporated in less than 20 minutes. By midday, directors were already shutting themselves in side rooms, trading hurried words as though an explanation could disguise what the general had declared openly. My phone lit again and again, calls from human resources, from legal, from Callahan's office itself. I ignored each one. They still believed I was an employee waiting for instructions, a resource to be summoned back into line. What they had not realized was that their authority over me had ended the moment the contract was suspended. The balance had shifted, imperceptible at first, decisive now. Then the call that mattered arrived. Not on the company network, not through official channels, but on the secure line only a few possessed. The name on the screen was simple and final: Hayes. I answered on the first ring. His voice was steady, direct, without pleasantry. He stated that the Pentagon would not continue cooperation until proper oversight of the Aegis defense system was restored. Then he clarified what proper meant. It meant me. There was no suggestion, no argument, only fact. I listened without surprise. He never asked if I would return to Callahan's company. He did not mention Madeline at all. He asked only what arrangements were required for me to assume direct control. I told him I would answer within 24 hours, with a structure that guaranteed both integrity and independence. He responded with a single word, "understood," before ending the call. When the line fell quiet, I leaned back and recognized the shape of the new order forming around me. It needed no anger, no desire for revenge. What had happened was not theft, it was correction away from a company that had chosen appearances, and back into the hands of someone who valued results over noise. By the next morning, I sat across from a lawyer whose skill was precision rather than performance. Together, we drafted the terms for a new entity, mine alone. Not a department bound by Callahan's authority, but a firm fully independent, contracted directly with the Pentagon. Its name was chosen quickly, and its design was deliberate. Red Falcon Security. Within hours, the proposal was on the board's desk. It did not request permission. It delivered terms, authority, oversight, and final decisions would rest with me alone. Their choice was simple: accept, or lose the Pentagon forever. By evening, the outcome was certain. Capitulation was written on the silence of their reply. The company had gambled on image. Now, it would live with cost. By the time the board returned their reply, the choice was already made. They did not negotiate, they surrendered. The Pentagon's trust was never theirs to bargain with. And Red Falcon Security was no longer a proposal. It was fact, written on contracts more valuable than any title Richard Callahan could bestow. The following week, I sat inside a new office stripped of pretense. There were no framed slogans, no banners, no theater, only a desk, 3 wide monitors, and the steady heartbeat of servers built to do what they were designed to do. For the first time in years, I was not a hidden employee beneath someone else's name. I was the architect in control of my own creation, and the government's trust rested squarely on me. News of the shift leaked slowly, then spread all at once. Callahan remained chief executive officer in name, his board now weighing every decision against his failure. Madeline never re-entered a boardroom. She was quietly sent to a remote branch in Europe, assigned to manage archives no one bothered to open. It was not exile delivered with fury, but with indifference, and indifference often cuts deeper than dismissal. I took no victory lap. I gave no speech. My satisfaction was quieter, but absolute. It was the sound of the Pentagon renewing cooperation through me, the sound of systems returning to stability, the proof that competence had reclaimed its place. Callahan's company had gambled on performance and lost $700 million before noon. I had held to silence. And in the end, that silence became the language of power. Looking around my new space, I felt no nostalgia for the floor I had left and no bitterness for the applause that once carried another name. Consequences had done the work I never needed to demand. Their authority shrank, their illusions dissolved, and I moved forward not by demanding a seat at their table, but by building my own. True power is not the title they tried to deny me. It is being the one they must call when everything else falls apart. And while their voices fade, mine remains in the steady hum of servers, the same hum that once carried my victories in secret, and that now stands as the anthem of Red Falcon.